Okay, day 4 this week, spiritual books. So now we've jumped out of here and we're going to jump more into here. Have you ever heard, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious? Well, now today we're going to talk about some religiously spiritual people. So before we jump into that, as you would say normally, the scriptures are the number one source where you can kind of dive into what Jesus Christ said. So before we jump into the saints and how they integrated Jesus Christ into their lives, you would jump into the scriptures and say, let's see how Jesus did this, or let's see how the prophets did this, or let's see how the apostles did this. How did they act? What did they do and not do? What can I imitate? As so often as that famous work of Thomas à Kempis was, The Imitation of Christ. Just as our church calendar imitates him and we are to imitate him, so that is what we are called to do in life, to read about also other people who imitated him and see how it can encourage us over time. First one of these are just a couple, man, you can have all kinds. These are just a couple that for you to begin to look at. One of the classics, Story of a Soul. So this is the autobiography of Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower. So something that she wrote that she didn't really want to, but she did it anyway out of obedience. But looking at the life of someone who finds in the little things ways to obey God. And it's a fascinating read. It'll go very quick. But she is one of the greatest saints. And so it's a good spiritual read at some point in your life. One of my favorites in a more spectacular way is the life of St. Anthony. So the life of St. Anthony, St. Athanasius and his many exiles way back in the day, St. Anthony of the Desert, he ran into him. And so eventually he puts together and writes the life of St. Anthony. And it's really amazing to see what he went through. This is an old work of St. Anthony who went into the desert, battled demons, battled his own temptations. And it kind of goes through and talks about the power of perseverance. So I encourage you. It's a great story, a great gift to the life of St. Anthony in the words of the great St. Athanasius. Another one of my personal favorites, a classic. Many of you have probably read this before, but The Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. St. Francis de Sales and I share his feast day and my birthday, so January 24th. So he's always been one of my favorites. He wrote Catholic Controversies, which we talked about on the Apologetics Day. But his spiritual work is just as, if not more powerful, The Introduction to the Devout Life. These are letters to his spiritual mentee in many ways over time, and they were put together, and he walks through all kinds of stuff. This is one you just read a chapter a day and take some minutes to think about it each day for a long time. So I definitely encourage you, Introduction to the Devout Life. Moving on away from the actual saints and into other people writing about them, this is a classic one. This is one that was given to me recently on St. Mary Magdalene. So you Magdaleners out there, this would be an interesting one for you to read. But this is a spiritual take, the prophetess of Eucharistic love. So it talks about St. Mary Magdalene in the context of adoring Jesus Christ. And so Father Sean Davidson writes this one, but it was a good read. A lot of really interesting information in there as well as spiritual. This is one I used to keep in the chapel and read through. Jacques Philippe's Interior Freedom, very short, just little pieces and tidbits of morality and how to live the moral life and how to find ways to persevere in it and be free, find ourselves free whenever we do that. So this is a nice little one to keep for your prayer time, Jacques Philippe, Interior Freedom. The last one is a little different. It's about discernment, and I recommend them oftentimes. This is by a Father Timothy Gallagher. He's an oblate of the Virgin Mary. It's in Latin, that's why it's in different order there. But it's called The Discernment of Spirits, and he writes from an Ignatian base. And so it's kind of his guide to everyday living, knowing how God and where God is pulling you. So this is his purple one. He has different color-coded ones. This is a little thicker one. And oftentimes, this one was always helpful to me in my discernment, and I've encouraged many of you to read it. Discerning the Will of God, an Ignatian Guide to Christian Decision-Making. How do you choose between two good things? And so he gives some examples. It's short. It's a quick read. Father Timothy Gallagher, a good way to make yourself more spiritually aware and a practical spirituality of listening to God's consolation and desolation in your life. How does he tug the heart? In what ways? So that ends some of the spiritual ones. So the saints, the scriptures, the saints and how they lived it and how we can imitate them and see their relationship with Christ, those who have written about the saints, and then different practical ways in which we can exercise our spirituality. So I encourage you, find some spiritual reading, find one book, here are some good starts, some good general categories, and continue doing that. And you'll do just fine. See you here next time for some new things.